This person's got so many 9s in their phone number. Ugh. I'll do it later. Well, welcome back to ECS TV viewers. It's Chris Nichols here from the camera store, and Jordan and I are coming to you from New York City right now. We're at a very special Panasonic gh5s event. Now, I should mention that we've had this camera for a month now. We've been playing with it extensively. This gives us a really amazing, beautiful, and very low light situation to really test the capabilities of this new camera. Now, I should mention Jordan's shooting me on the gh5s tonight and in Like 709 profile right now. I've brought my trusty gh5 with me as well. So we're going to play with these here tonight, use this very interesting low light background, and get some solid tests for you. Now I'm going to enjoy my old fashioned while I explain to you a little bit about the new sensor on the gh5s. But first off, I want to start back with the gh5. And when we first played with this camera, we were very impressed by the performance enhancement in low light, high ISO performance. But it was only for video, not for stills. It was largely improvement in the processing power on the gh5 as opposed to a different sensor. Now that we've got the gh5s, we have a brand new sensor to go with it. Now this is a 12 megapixel sensor roughly, but it's a multi-aspect ratio, and you're effectively getting 10 megapixels. I just kind of want to explain what's going on here. In order to maintain the 4K resolution but give better performance at different Cinema 4K formats as well as 16:9, they had to oversize the sensor a bit. Now this means that you don't get the same 2x crop factor that you get on the gh5. You actually get roughly a 1.8, so it's helping a little bit with the wide angle, giving you that extra space to get that wider Cinema 4K frame, and at the same time we're really avoiding things like vignetting. Now we do find with the Metabones XL we're getting a little bit, but it's minor, and with most native glass you're not going to see any problems there. So this really again opens up the potential for the video, but it really doesn't affect the stills. If anything, we're losing half the resolution for still photography. Now the gh5s has some very interesting technology which is borrowed from its higher end siblings such as the VariCams and the EVA 1, and that's this dual ISO performance. Now I just want to explain what that means. First off, here's the numbers. We've confirmed it's 400 ISO and then 2500 ISO. Now generally speaking with cameras, when we talk about an ISO number, as we raise the ISO we're basically just boosting the exposure on the sensor artificially and adding noise at the same time. What you're doing though is losing dynamic range generally speaking as you crank that ISO. This does vary from camera to camera, but what the gh5s is able to do is process the sensor at two separate ISOs separately. So when you shoot at 2500, although you are going to get more noise, you're not just boosting the noise floor with an artificial boost, you're actually processing it differently. So again, just to recap, you're not going to escape the noise, but you're still going to get a lot of shadow and highlight detail that you would otherwise lose. So Panasonic is definitely trying to bring a color to their image, and it's obvious on the gh5s. We have 4 signature red things on this camera that I can see. A very obvious red record button, a little red letter S after gh5, and also a red metal accent under the mode dial. But they've also got a night mode feature, and this is quite interesting. When you're shooting in low light, in order to avoid night blindness and losing your low light vision when you become accustomed to it, you can turn on a night mode, and the menu is going to be a red color. It's very interesting. It goes in line with their looks. However, if there was ever a camera that needed backlit controls, LED lit dials and buttons, the gh5s would be it. It'd be excellent in a situation like this. Alright, so we're back in Calgary, and we're doing this video because we've now had a chance to really play with the camera, analyze it, and form some opinions beyond just, that quick trip. And so I kind of want to talk about a lot of the features that you've just seen in that video, the ones that are really going to make a big difference and impact you here today. Now, first off, I think the big thing I want to address right off the bat, the image stabilization, or on the gh5s, the lack of it. That pissed off a lot of people, and it irked a lot of people, and I totally understand, because for Jordan and I doing a YouTube show, that's a big downside for us. It means the gh5s is not going to be our primary camera, but you got to understand why that's happening. Having the larger oversized sensor on the gh5s lets this camera fulfill a different niche. And yeah, it does mean that you're not going to get image stabilization. This is not going to be the best run and gun camera. But look at it this way. It opens up a special niche, because the other huge benefit and change on the gh5s is low light performance in a big way. The gh5
already improved things about a stop over the GH4, and now you've got a GH5S improving things another stop and a half. This does a bunch of stuff. Now, first off, it proves that Micro Four Thirds can be competitive in this field of videography. Just because it's a smaller sensor doesn't mean it's incapable of delivering excellent results. And for our show with the GH5, I'll admit that we do struggle with light sometimes, and so often Jordan's using a Sigma 18-35 1.8 with a speed booster to try to collect as much light as possible for that smaller sensor. But with the GH5S and its enhanced performance, that opens up the possibility to go back to using more cinematic glass like Vedra lenses, which are fast, but having that better sensor, we don't necessarily need to maximize that. I can use these lenses, I can use native lenses, I can get away with smaller lenses, and if this camera is really going to be more suited for cinematic work and spend a lot of time on a tripod, these things don't become such big downsides. They just make this camera specialized for a different task. Now, on top of that, the new sensor gives us some other benefits I want to touch on. Now, first off, better slow-mo, always nice for a more cinematic filmmaking camera. But on top of that, this new sensor gives us a totally different color science, and it's very similar to what we're seeing on the brand new Panasonic EVO 1, the bigger brother to this camera, which would make this an awesome second camera for that. This color science is a little bit more Canon-esque, which is to say there's a little bit more magenta in the midtones, color's beautiful. It would actually match more closely to a lot of the C200 and C300 cameras, which are so prolific in the commercial industry, and I think it's a good move on their part. The brand new sensor also is going to give you better dynamic range. I mean, that's what we're hoping for, and so Jordan did actually shoot the G9 episode with the GH5S, and he's going to talk next about his thoughts on the dynamic range and more on this new camera.
Thanks, Chris. It's Jordan, the video guy, to talk about using the GH5S in more of a bright light, high contrast situation. So I used this camera to shoot our entire Panasonic G9 review, where it was bright light with a lot of bright snow in the shot. And looking at the waveform, it looked exactly the same as what I would see with my GH5. But what was really exciting when I brought that footage into post, I found I actually had much more usable shadows than I get with the regular GH5. So that means I've got a lot more usable dynamic range. I would say 11.5 or so stops. But then when we were in New York, I talked to some of the Panasonic technicians, and they told me there's actually a little more dynamic range you can squeeze out of this when you're shooting in the HLG profile. I just find it very disappointing that they've kind of handicapped the V-Log-L profile to make it work well with an EVO 1 or a VariCam. I wish I could have it access all the dynamic range that's there. But only things that are better are going to be dedicated cinema cameras right now, and this is an excellent performing camera if you're concerned about high contrast shoots.
So who is the GH5S for? Well, I think the first initial reaction people have is, why is there no image stabilization? That seems like such a big loss, and we already have the GH5, so why would I buy this camera? And to some degree, I would agree with that, insofar as if you're a YouTuber, if you're a vlogger, if you're doing run and gun stuff, documentary work, or a show like Jordan and I do here on YouTube, the GH5 does make way more sense. Having the image stabilization, as well as from a photographic standpoint, having things like the 6K photo mode and the higher resolution, the GH5 also wins there. However, the GH5S, I have to say, first off, is going to be the best video quality that we've really seen in a small camera like this. And yeah, the A7S III might be coming out in the future. What's it going to do? Is Blackmagic going to blow us away with something in their new compact camera series? But really, right now, this is the best video quality you're going to get in a small camera body like this. This camera really belongs on set. That's where you've got lighting, you've got studio stands, you've got assistants, you've got gimbals, all the grip, and that's where this camera is really going to excel. It is the best low light and just overall video quality that Panasonic offers. And in fact, Jordan's going to be making short film this summer, and he's strongly considering using this as a main cam for that. I just want to make one more point as well. I mean, does this have any sort of redeeming photo quality? Yes and no. For photographers, what's very interesting is Panasonic is now saying that this is the first 14-bit RAW format in a Panasonic camera for stills. That being said, we're not really going to see much improvement from that. It's an interesting technological achievement, and hopefully we'll see that move forward in more capable photo cameras. And low light performance in photography, although it is better, the fact that you've got 12 megapixels, the fact that cameras like the GH5 and G9 give you that 20 megapixel resolution kind of makes up for the fact that in low light it will be a little bit sharper here. The higher res is going to make things balance out, so I wouldn't call that a strong advantage. All right, well, hopefully you found that useful. Again, don't forget, Instagram, check us out there, follow us on Twitter, let us know your comments below, but we are very eager to see you soon.